Hey, it's Pastor Tom. As I stated in our Exodus study, we are going to do videos to go with our Bible study. And these videos will point to things that are actually outside of the text that we're studying, kind of the chapters in between, things that I want to just take a moment and point your attention to and bring up just a few things in hopes of just kind of adding to the Bible study experience. I still invite you to read the chapters in between. The idea of reading of all the text really would give you a much more full vision. But today, I want to take a moment and talk about Moses and Midian. Right? The story is Moses grows up, and one day he sees an Egyptian beating up a Hebrew. And he intervenes, and he strikes the Egyptian down, killing him. As a result, he flees to Midian and hides out there. And of course, while he's in Midian, he meets his wife. He actually meets her at a well, which is a nice biblical image of where you meet potential wives in the Old Testament. But he grows, and he actually has a son there as well. And so the two things I want to kind of point your attention to is first, the idea of time. Right? We're told that Moses does this when he grows up, right? He grows up, and when he's grown up, he kills the Egyptian who is abusing the Hebrew. And then we're told that at the end of chapter 2, what kind of triggers his return to Egypt, or God to reach out to Moses to then send him out to Egypt, send him back to Egypt, is the death of Pharaoh, right? So we had a Pharaoh in chapter 1, and in chapter 2, the end of 3, we're told that there is a new Pharaoh that arises. And this is important because when a Pharaoh would die in the ancient world, it was not uncommon to set slaves free, to provide amnesty to those who were away. So it's this kind of interesting moment in time because there is a chance with the change of Pharaoh that the Israelites would have been set free. And there's a chance that Moses, who's a wanted criminal, would get amnesty because a new Pharaoh has risen. So, right, you talk about how the time that has passed from one Pharaoh's reign to another's, but also how there's a kind of cultural change. That the Pharaoh that Moses grew up under is no longer the same Pharaoh when he goes back to Egypt. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to talk about is identity. Moses has a unique identity in that, right, he is a Hebrew, but he's raised by Pharaoh's daughter. So this means kind of an interesting cultural conflict that is here. At times, when he murders the Egyptian, he identifies with the Hebrew, right? He sees them as his brethren. While at the same time, when he arrives in Midian, Raul identifies him as an Egyptian. Meaning that when he sees them, he identifies him as the Egyptian instead of a Hebrew. And I think one of the best demonstrations of this kind of interesting identity question for Moses comes in a little bit farther in the text. It comes in Exodus 4:24. And it has to do with Moses' son. In Exodus 4:24, we hear Moses' son get sick. And in response, Moses' wife circumcises Moses' son. And as a result of circumcision, he's saved. He doesn't die. But when we talk about circumcision in the Old Testament, circumcision is an identifier of being Jewish. It's an identifier of being a Hebrew. It's the thing that God commands Abraham to do, not only to himself, but to everybody who's associated with him, to identify themselves as followers of God. And so in an interesting way, I think at this point in the text, there's this interesting tension between whether Moses is an Egyptian or a Hebrew. That he's kind of a man between two cultures, stuck between the oppressor and the oppressed. And of course, as we're going to find out, through the call of God, he's going to identify with the oppressed. I hope to see you on Thursday, and if you have any questions or this video brings up any more questions, I'd be glad to talk to them then. God bless and take care.